Hello everyone, welcome back to the Stitches in STEM YouTube channel. My name is Michaela and this is podcast episode 38. It's been so long since my last podcast episode, and I feel like I've been saying that in every episode recently, but this is by far the longest break I've taken from uploading a podcast episode. I have uploaded other videos. I uploaded project blogs, which I'll talk about later in the video, but this is the first podcast episode in, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 months. So it's been a very long time. As a result, I have a lot to talk about. I hope you're comfortable because this will probably be a long video and you can of course watch it in parts. As always, I'll leave timestamps, so if you want to stop watching at any point, you'll be able to find your place easily enough if you want to come back. I've recently gotten a lot of new subscribers, which I'm so grateful for. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction, but if you've seen and heard it all before, you can skip ahead to the knitting. I'll put a timestamp on the screen. As I said, my name is Michaela and I'm a knitter in Dublin, Ireland. I'm a scientist in my day job, so the channel name Stitches in STEM comes from the idea of women in STEM. Before Stitches in STEM, it was a crochet name, and when I started knitting, I changed it to Stitches so that it was applicable to both knitting and crochet. To be honest, I didn't like the name that much, and I told myself that it was just something temporary until I came up with something better, but I never came up with something better, and now I've gotten like 7,000 subscribers and 5,000 followers on Instagram, and I think I have to keep the name now, so it stuck and it has grown on me, thankfully. I've been knitting for I think 4 years now, and I was crocheting for about 2 years before that. I started during the pandemic like a lot of people. When I'm not in work and when I'm not knitting, I'm usually just spending time with my dog. His name is Reggie and I love him so much. He is the light of my life. I also do pole fitness and I do like to take good care of my physical health, so I go to the gym and I go running, although I don't necessarily like those things. It just kind of feels like an obligation and I know it's good for me and I know my future self will thank me, so that's why I do those things. And my other hobby is video games. I love video games. I have a Switch and I have a PS5, and yeah, I'm a big single player open world video game kind of person. Like the Horizon games are some of my favourite. Breath of the Wild is probably my favourite game of all time. I do have some things in the description box that you might find interesting. Number 1 is a yarn shop directory that I made to help Irish knitters find some of the more popular Scandinavian brands within Ireland. It's not shops that stock in Ireland because there are very few of those. It's actually shops in Europe but that ship to Ireland and stock brands like Sandnesgar, Knitting for Olive, Isair, Filkalana, etc. I created it with the intention of helping Irish knitters, but it would definitely be helpful to other knitters in the EU, so feel free to take a look at that if you want. I also have an affiliate link for the Woolly Thistle. They are a yarn shop in the US, but they stock Eru yarn, which is an Irish yarn brand, and I've talked about it before on my channel and I've had a few people ask where they can get it. So you can get it at a Woolly Thistle, and if you purchase it through the link in my description box, I'll get a little percentage of that sale, but no extra cost to you. So if you want to support the channel and you want to try some Irish yarns, that's a great way to do both. So I think that's everything, which means we can get into our first finished object of today, which is probably my kind of proudest project that I've ever made, and that is what I've decided to call my Aidan jumper. I will put photos up so you can see it properly, but this is a recreation of a jumper that belonged to my granddad, which I'll show you as well. I've talked the ear off a lot of you about this jumper, so I do apologise, but for all of the new subscribers, this is the jumper that I was recreating. This panel here used to be honeycomb, but it was damaged by moths, and when I got it repaired, because I didn't know how to knit at the time, they just repaired it with a panel of double moss stitch or double seed stitch. But you can see the honeycomb panel on the back is what it used to look like. In an ideal world, I would find a yarn that matches this exactly and I would reknit that front panel now that I know how to knit. So that is possibly on my agenda for some point in the future, but for now I just settled with recreating the whole thing. So as you can see, it's a very classic Irish Aran jumper. It was even made in Ireland. It's 100% wool. It's very rustic, very itchy, very oversized. In short, it's completely unwearable for me. I love having it as something to remember my granddad by, but I never wear this. But I wanted to recreate it in a more wearable format, so I've spent the last 6.5 months reverse engineering it, and I'm so proud of the outcome. The yarn that I used is Explorer Knits and Fibres Rocky's DK in the colour Ave Noir. I knit it on 3.5mm needles, and my gauge was I kind of took 2 gauges. So for the honeycomb, it was 32 stitches and 10 centimeters. But for the other cables, so the diamond and the 2x2 twist here, it was 25 stitches and 10 centimeters. I have so much to say on this project, so this is going to be a long segment. But first things first, one of the reasons I haven't uploaded a podcast episode is because I was busy editing a project vlog instead, which I have uploaded in 2 parts. It was just so long, and I really did try and cut as much unnecessary footage as I could. But ultimately, maybe it's a little bit selfish, but I wanted to make it for me as well. Like, this was such a monumental project, and to be able to watch it back in a project vlog like that is actually so special. That wasn't my intention when I set out making the vlog. I didn't think I would get as much enjoyment out of watching it back for my own kind of sentimental reasons as I did. but I'm really, really glad that I put the time into recording and editing the footage. So I uploaded part 1 and 2 about a week apart, and I have a way lower view count on them than I usually do for my other videos, which I completely expected, so it's absolutely fine. I know project vlogs aren't everyone's cup of tea, and this one is obviously very long, like a feature-length film in total, so I didn't actually expect that many people to watch it. But again, I had the footage. I was never not going to edit it once I had the footage. I have gotten a good few comments on it, and those comments are incredibly supportive and enthusiastic. So to me, it kind of feels like, yes, there's fewer people watching it, but those few people really love it. So that's been really special to me. If you do want to watch them, of course, I'll link them down below. But yeah, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, so I don't have any expectation with it. I'm also going to release a video tutorial on this, which I'm currently recording with my second sample, which I'll show later, and I'm going to release it as a free pattern. I have had a few people ask me if I would do a pay-as-you-can system, similar to the step-by-step sweater by Florence Miller, but I think for that you have to list it as a price on Ravelry, and then you can provide a discount code. I do want to list it as free, so it has a little, I wanted to have like the little red star on it that says free when it's a free pattern. I don't want people to see a price and be put off and not click into it and realize that it's actually free, because one thing that I want for this pattern is to kind of introduce intermediate beginners to cabling, to Aidan jumpers, to kind of an Irish style of Aidan jumper, which is very important to me. So I don't want anyone to be put off by the price, so I would like to list it for free. And if there's a way of having a link in the listing that will direct people to somewhere where they can pay, like I have a Ko-fi or Ko-fi or whatever it's called account where people can kind of just donate money if they want. So I was thinking maybe I could link people to that. But yeah, if you have any ideas, let me know. I am perfectly happy to just have it for free, but a few people have suggested that they would like to contribute something towards the effort that went into it. So yeah, if you have any ideas for how I could work around that, do let me know. As for that pattern, it is currently in testing. I posted a tester call in June, I think, or maybe July, middle of July, I think it was. I actually uploaded a tester call as a standalone video. I did say that I was going to do a tester call as part of a podcast episode, but I didn't have time to record a podcast episode, and I didn't want people who only follow me on YouTube to miss out on the tester call. So yeah, I just uploaded a very short video calling for testers with the details of the tester call. And of course, I also posted about it on Instagram, and I got nearly 200 applications, which I was not expecting at all. Like, could not believe it. I've written it for sizes extra small up to 5XL, and I think it's 9 sizes, and originally I was going to do 2 or 3 testers per size, so maximum 27 testers, but I ended up picking 4, sometimes 5 testers per size. When I was taking on that number, I was worried that I was going to be a bit overwhelmed by the large number, but I told myself that people would probably drop out, and they already have, which is fine. That's absolutely understandable. You know, life happens, life gets in the way. But I did take that into account when I was picking the tester number. So I still have a very large group of testers. I still have 4 to 5 per size. So it's going to be very well tested. But yeah, the test period is going on until the middle of November. And then with extra edits and stuff that I have to make for the pattern, I'm not sure when I'll be able to release it. It will definitely be in the winter sometime, January at the latest. I'll obviously update you more when that time comes. One very cool aspect of the tester call was that I got to collaborate with Sierra of Ballihora Fibres on it. And so she provided a 15% discount to testers who used her yarn. And we picked 3 colourways in advance that would be available to use as part of the test knit. Those colourways were Woolen, Lake Muskery and Sea Aster. And they were going to be available on 4 different bases. So that was really exciting. And of course, it's been amazing seeing people tag me on Instagram knitting this pattern. That is just mind-blowing to me. The testing experience has been very interesting, a bit chaotic for me, because it's, you know, I'm not a knitwear designer as a full-time job. Like it is actually a lot of time to run a test knit. When people send in corrections and things, I have to check if it's a pattern breaking, basically, like if they can't proceed unless that correction is made. And then obviously I have to correct it as soon as possible, or if it's something like a typo or something that I don't have to do right then and there if I'm in work or something. So yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, but I think most of the major mistakes have kind of been ironed out by now, which is great. Some people have already finished, which is incredibly fast, but that's also a huge relief to me because they got a finished project out of it that actually fits and everything. So I feel like I was holding my breath waiting for the first person to finish, and when they did, I just, okay. So I do think the rest of the test knit period will be a little bit more relaxed now. I read through the pattern multiple times. I lost count of how many times I read it before I sent it out. I double checked all the numbers. I even printed out a spreadsheet with all of the numbers. So like every every time there was a stitch count written, so like for the sleeve, pick up X amount of stitches, and there was obviously 9 numbers because there's 9 sizes. Every time there was 9 numbers listed like that, I wrote them into an Excel, I printed it out, I gave it to my dad, and I told him to call out the numbers while I read in the pattern to make sure that the numbers were correct. I used formulas in Excel to make sure that all the numbers added up. To be honest, I felt really bad about testers giving up their time if there was mistakes in the pattern and stuff, so I really tried to iron out as many as I could. But I'm sure we all have experience with reading something so many times that you almost go cross-eyed looking at it and you can't see any more mistakes, and it only takes one fresh pair of eyes to spot a mistake. So I do think I caught as many mistakes as I physically could before my eyes just stopped working and I had to get other people to look at it. So yeah, it has been interesting. It's definitely been a learning experience, and it's been a little bit nerve-wracking, but I hope it's going to be worth it when the pattern is out. Enough about all of that. I haven't even started talking about the actual jumper. In the last episode, I was very close to being finished. I had basically knit both cuffs, but I hadn't bound them off, and I had knit each cuff differently, and I hadn't started the ribbing on the body, but I think I was just about to. I think I was about here. So on one cuff I had gone down to a 3mm needle, and on the other cuff I went down to 2.75mm needle, and I also did a decrease every 10 stitches for that cuff. I wasn't sure what I wanted the cuff to look like, so I figured I would do them differently and just redo one or both of them. I did end up redoing both of them on 2.75mm needles, but I decreased every 8 stitches instead of every 10. For reference, on stockinette jumpers, if I wanted a cinched cuff or a cinched hem, I would decrease every 7 stitches. And the honeycomb cable really pulls in the fabric. The gauge on the honeycomb is a lot tighter than stockinette, so if I wanted that same cinched effect, I would have had to decrease it even more frequently, maybe every 6 or even every 5 stitches. But I wasn't really thinking clearly for some reason, so I just did 8. It's probably not as cinched as I intended, but I am happy with it, and if I wasn't, it's a very easy fix. For the body ribbing, I did the same. I decreased every 8 stitches, and I'm very happy with how that looks. I am delighted with the fit of this overall. The length of the body is like a fraction too short, but I think because it's superwash merino, it will stretch. Hopefully not too much, but it will stretch with wear and hopefully reach that ideal length. The sleeves, on the other hand, are a fraction too long, but I do find with my sleeves that when I'm bending my elbows and stuff, the fabric kind of gathers in the elbow and the sleeve kind of pulls up as a result, so I think that's what will happen with this as well. As for the circumference, I just measured it, and there's apparently 10 centimeters of positive ease, although when I'm wearing it, it feels like more, but according to the measurement, there is 10 centimeters of positive ease in this jumper, and actually that is what I intended when I started knitting this, but as I was knitting it and trying it on, I felt like it was more in the 15 centimeter range. I did measure it at points, so I don't know, I can't remember what my measurements were, but for some reason I had in my head that it had 15 centimeters of positive ease until I just measured it right now, and it's actually 10. So I did get what I intended, but maybe just didn't realize it. I will show some close-ups of the cables. My favorite actually is the column of twisted stitches, which I just think give a really polished and structured look to the jumper, which I absolutely love. As for the neckline, I talked about this in my last episode, but I prefer the look of this neckline when you can't see the collar of whatever I'm wearing underneath. I do think that look is fine for other jumpers that I own, but for this one I just prefer the look of not being able to see the collar underneath. Most of my t-shirts are crew necks, and I found that they were actually visible under the collar, so I ended up putting elastic into the collar, which I will show. You can see that little thin line of elastic there and there. So I threaded that through and it cinched it in enough. For adding the elastic, I didn't follow any one specific tutorial. I watched a few different videos and they were kind of all doing the same thing. I thought there might be like a technique to it, but there really wasn't, so I will link one down below. They kind of all show the same thing as far as I'm concerned. When I was knitting the neck opening, and I talked about this in my project vlog, I was worried that it was a little bit too big. But once I added the collar, it cinched it in enough that I was happy with it, but I think it's just kind of relaxed over time. So in hindsight, I probably could have knit the neck opening a little bit smaller, but yeah, it's fine for now, and hopefully the elastic keeps it in place. The yarn, as I mentioned, is Explore Knits and Fibres Rockies DK, which is 100% superwash merino, and I used 589 grams in total, so it is heavy, and superwash merino it doesn't have that same grippiness as non-superwash merino, so I am a little bit worried about this sagging over time. I didn't want to go with the non-superwash because the colour was less saturated, so the sagging was just a risk that I decided to take, and we'll just have to see what happens to that end. As for this colourway, there was some bleeding. I talked about this extensively in my project vlog, and also I think in my last episode where I was talking about a colour difference in the sleeve. I had used 2 skeins, and one skein had been incorporated into the jumper when I had done mid-project block, and it lost a bit of colour, which was noticeable when I started using a new skein, and you could see that the new skein was more saturated or darker than the old skein. I thought maybe the water was too warm, so it was my fault, but the next block I did, I made sure the water was definitely cool enough and there was still an awful lot of bleeding. I also don't think the bleeding happened uniformly because you can see some kind of striping in the body, which wasn't there before the block. I do know that darker, more saturated colours are more prone to bleeding. It's absolutely fine. This doesn't bother me at all. And actually the striping doesn't bother me either because to me it really kind of makes it clear that it's hand dyed. One of my favourite features of hand dyed yarns, especially of tonal yarns, is that kind of natural variation in colour that you don't get with a commercially dyed yarn, because hand dyed yarn is not cheap, and so it's nice to see those features that separate us from a commercial dyed yarn. So I really like that that feature is actually visible here, and the camera is definitely blowing it out a little bit more. It's not as obvious in real life, but yeah, I don't mind it at all. So that is that. A long time on the needles, but definitely worth it. I've gotten so much love on this project, so thank you so much to all of your enthusiasm for it. Project vlogs, as I mentioned, are linked below if you want to watch them. The pattern will be released sometime in the winter, as I said. I would love to get it out before Christmas, but I don't know if that's going to be possible. It's obviously quite a complex pattern, and I want to make sure there's no mistakes. I don't want to rush it, so it might be January when it's released. I just don't want to get anyone's expectations up that it might be out before Christmas. So yeah, after 6.5 long months, my Aidan jumper is finished, and that is that. I don't know if I mentioned, but it's probably obvious. My granddad's name was Aidan. That's why I called it the Aidan jumper. My next finished object is based on the Daily Pullover by Pearl Soho. I heavily modified the pattern, which I'll talk about in a minute, but just to get the basics out of the way, this yarn is Great Ocean Road Woolen Mills Summer Fiesta 4-ply in the colour Moss Green, I believe. Great Ocean Road is an Australian yarn brand, and this is a merino linen blend. The pattern gauge is 24 stitches and 34 rows and 10 centimetres, but my gauge was closer to 26, 27 stitches. And I knit the size 3, which is the 41.25 inch, so the sizes are given in bust circumference, so this is the 41.25 inch size, and I knit it on 2.75mm needles. So it's pretty basic raglan v-neck jumper, all stockinette. And in the last episode I was halfway through the first sleeve, which as you can see I've finished, and obviously finished the second sleeve as well. I've blocked this, I've woven in the ends, it's ready to wear, and I'm actually very happy with this, although it did give me a lot of trouble. There are some things that I would change if I made it again, and I actually would make it again, even considering the trouble that I had with it. To recap that trouble, I don't think the numbers in the pattern add up to what they're supposed to add up. Although no one else seemed to mention that on Ravelry, which made me wonder if I was reading it wrong. Ultimately, I never found out if it was my mistake or a mistake in the pattern. I read over it 5 or 6 times. It's very straightforward. Like, you can see the number of rows that are in the back yoke. Let's say it's like 65 rows, and you can see the row gauge. And so you should be able to divide the number of rows by the row gauge and figure out how long the back yoke is going to end up being. But it wasn't going to be deep enough to meet my underarm. Even if I was on gauge, I would have had to add rows. And the fact that my gauge was even tighter than the pattern, I had to add even more rows. So it took me a lot longer to knit the back yoke than it should have, but I got there in the end. When I swatched for this, I did meet gauge, but ultimately when I started knitting, I think I just was knitting a little bit tighter. I didn't want to start over, so I just reworked the numbers to get the measurements that I wanted. The pattern does have a pretty good schematic, so I used all of the numbers in the schematic and just calculated new stitch and row counts based on my stitch and row gauge. I had intended for this to be kind of a loose, drapey top that I could wear over a cami or a t-shirt in the summer, but my tight gauge means the fabric is quite dense, and even though it feels quite light, it's a summer fabric, it does have a nice drape to it. I get very warm when I wear this, and there's no way I'd be able to wear a t-shirt underneath it, so it's either going to be something that I wear by itself or with just kind of a string cami on cooler days in spring, autumn, which is still fine. There is absolutely a place for this in my wardrobe. Another thing, and I think this would have been the case if I'd followed the pattern and if I was on gauge, is I think the sleeves don't have enough ease in them as I would like them to, considering the amount of ease that's in the body. If I look at them too hard, I just think they look out of proportion, and it's just not my preference. But having looked at the project photos on Ravelry, I actually think this is the intended fit, which is just something that I didn't notice when I bought the pattern. And actually, when I reworked my stitch and row count to match the schematic, I did notice that the sleeve circumference given in the schematic was quite narrow. It actually would have had negative ease on my arm. So I added some centimetres to the sleeve and based my stitch count on that. So I am really glad I added those extra centimetres, and to be honest, I probably could have added a few more, but yeah, here we are. As I said, it does have a place in my wardrobe. It is something I'll wear. It's just that, to me, it reminds me of the Boxy by Joji Locatelli, which has the quite large circumference body and then the tight sleeves. It's not my preference of fit, but I am absolutely open to having this in my wardrobe, wearing it, and see if it grows on me. One very minor thing, which I've noticed since finishing, and is something that I kind of learned from and applied it to another project, which I'll show in a bit, is that the v-neck decreases kind of bunch in the middle towards the top of the decreases. Almost like there's too much fabric there, like I'm not decreasing rapidly enough. In the pattern, you decrease every second row, and that's been the case for every V-neck that I've ever knit, is you do that kind of center double decrease every second row. So they have you decreasing 1 in every 2 rows, but I think I could have gotten away with decreasing 2 in every 3 rows. So decreasing more frequently to remove that excess fabric and getting rid of that weird bunching that I see there. It's not visible when I'm like wearing the jumper and moving around, but if I'm standing still and if I'm nitpicking, I can notice it. So that's just something that, as I said, I learned from, and I did get a chance to apply it to another project. I want to say I'd make it again, but I actually don't feel like I made the pattern with all the changes that I made to it. But I would make whatever this is again with wider sleeves. I do really like the look of the deep V-neck, thick ribbing, long sleeve kind of top that I could wear either on its own or else over something light in the summer. As for the yarn, I absolutely love this yarn. It's one of my favorites that I've worked with probably since I started knitting. I got it when I went to Australia last year, and before I went to Australia I was visiting a friend and I had ordered a bunch of yarn online to have delivered to her house. I was getting another yarn from Great Ocean Road called Lavelier, which was a wool and marine wool and alpaca blend. I saw this summer fiesta on their website and it was kind of semi-impulsive. Like all of the other yarns that I had ordered in advance, I actually made shopping lists. I narrowed it down to the yarns that I really wanted. I picked projects for them all. But when I saw this one on their website, I just kind of thought, that looks interesting. I'll try that one as well. And I'm so glad I bought it. I was knitting this at a tight gauge, and so it was quite rough on my hands because it was just kind of tensioning very tightly around my hand and fingers. But the finished fabric is lovely. Even though the fabric is dense, it's still quite light and drapey. And if I have the opportunity to get more of this yarn, I definitely will. I would love to knit something else with this yarn. I'll show a close-up, but I absolutely love the marling effect that you get from the blend of the linen and the wool together. I'm so obsessed with the yarn, and I can't wait to get the opportunity to try it again. They do have quite a small selection of colours, but they do have an undyed one, which I would probably get. You don't get as much of the marling effect, I guess, but that's okay with me. I think the undyed colour, the natural colour of the undyed yarn is really, really pretty. So yeah, that would be number 1 on my shopping list now. Last thing I'll say in this before I get my final thoughts is I want to talk about the short rows on the back, which you can see when I'm holding up because of the way the collar is kind of creasing there. I can't see it when I'm wearing it, obviously, because it's at the back, and even if my hair is down, other people can't see it. A lot of people on Ravelry have said that those short rows aren't necessary, and I probably tend to agree with them. I don't think they are, and I actually think they just create that weird bump that you might not like, especially if you're someone who wears your hair up or if you have short hair. I'd probably leave them out if I made it again. I just didn't think they were necessary. There weren't even that many of them. I just kind of felt like, why am I doing this? As for my final thoughts, I'm honestly quite happy with this. I think I would give it a 9 out of 10, and I would just take away 1 point for the kind of funny fit between the arms being slightly too tight compared to the body. At multiple points while knitting this, I didn't think it was going to work out at all. So all those things considered, I'm really happy with this. I definitely will wear it. There's definitely a place for it in my wardrobe. There was a really big chance that it was going to be a complete flop, and I just kept telling myself, if this flops, are you really going to want to frog it and re-knit it because it's a fingering weight garment? And the answer was probably no. So yeah, I was really just kind of hoping that it didn't flop, and it didn't. I think this is my first time knitting a fingering weight garment with like long sleeves and a full yoke. Basically like not a cami. I definitely need a break from fingering weight garments after this, but I would absolutely knit something similar in the future. I really just love the finished fabric. I think it's absolutely worth the effort. So yes, that is my heavily modified daily pullover. My next finished object is my Sweet Shop blanket by Laura Penrose. I'm going to go all the way back so I can fit it. For this, I used Hobby Rainbow Cotton 86, which is their sport weight 100% cotton yarn. I have a load of this yarn in different colorways in my stash, and this is a gift for my cousin who's having a baby girl next month. And I knit this on a 3.5mm needle. Most of the colorways are listed in my Ravelry project page, with the exception of 1 or 2 that I lost the label for, and I can't remember what the colorway name is. You've probably heard of this pattern before, but as I said, it's by Laura Penrose. And the name for the type of construction is escaping me, but I believe it's modular, where there's no seaming. So for every square that you add, you're picking up along the edge of an already existing square and knitting from it. So you start in the bottom corner, and then you can pick up along this edge here to work this square, or you can pick up along this edge to work this square, and you can just continue and keep adding squares. The I-cord is optional. I mean, it's mentioned in the pattern as being optional, and I decided to add it this time. I say this time, I have made this pattern before. I made a larger one using a yarn advent calendar that I had, and I didn't add a border to that one. My intention was for this blanket to be appropriate for a buggy or a car seat, so I did 4 squares across and 5 squares down, and I think it's I think it's a good size. Hopefully it goes down well with the new parents. It is machine washable, being 100% cotton, so that's obviously a benefit when it comes to baby stuff. This is a very handy pattern for using up scraps, but I kind of have a weird relationship with this pattern. I just find it hard to pick up, but once I do pick it up, I am absolutely fine with knitting it. It's more like, I don't know, I just can't find the motivation to pick it up to add a square. But once I add a square, I very easily will add another square without having to convince myself too much. So I do enjoy knitting it once I've started, but it's just getting that initial motivation for some reason. I don't know why. And I do love the finished object that it produces. So I have blocked this. I've woven in the ends. I just realised I haven't trimmed some there. I find it so difficult to weave in the ends on this pattern. I think a lot of people use the weave and Steven method, but as far as I'm aware, that means the ends are only woven in one direction, and it just feels a bit insecure to me. With this, I didn't use the weave and Steven method. I just, every time I finished a square, I wove in the ends with a darning needle. But each square has 6 ends to weave in, so you kind of end up with like hard lumps where I've woven in the ends, which doesn't feel great, but I don't really know what else to do to make sure that it's secure, especially because it's a baby blanket. It'll probably get thrown around a bit, and I want to make sure the ends are secure. So I'd rather have those areas where it doesn't feel particularly nice, because there's a lot of ends woven in kind of one spot, or roughly around the same spot, if that means that it's secure, rather than weaving them in a not so obvious way, but then being slightly less secure. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this. I'm really happy with how it turned out, and now that I've shown it, I can gift it to the new parents. My next finished object is another self-drafted jumper, and I am so proud of this one. I am very proud of my Aidan jumper, but one big thing about that is that I could try it on as I went. So it wasn't really a surprise to me at the end when I tried it on and I was happy with the fit. It was very easy to see along the way whether it was working or not. And I was able to undo it, re-knit sections if I needed to, and ultimately, you know, it fit the way that I expected it to. But with this one, I knit this flat in panels and seamed it all together. And so I couldn't try it on until it was all seamed together. So I have skipped ahead a bit, but yes, this is a self-drafted broken rib V-neck jumper. The yarn that I use for this is Ochre Yarns 306 in the colour Blossom Pink. Ochre Yarns is another Australian brand, so this was one of those yarns that I ordered online and had delivered to my friend. My gauge is 20 stitches and 10 centimetres, but as you can see, this is broken rib, which is a very flexible stitch, and I found it very difficult to kind of measure my gauge consistently. It could depend on as little as whatever way I was holding the panel before I placed it down to measure it. So if I was holding it from the bottom 2 corners, or if I was holding it from the bottom right and top right corner, that would also affect the way it ended up laying on the ground, and then that would affect my gauge. But 20 stitches is the most kind of consistent gauge that I've gotten. I knit this with the help of a book by Amy Herzog. This is the Ultimate Sweater book, and I did get this to help me with my Aidan jumper, but I didn't realise that the book only applied to bottom-up jumpers knit in pieces and seamed together, whereas the Aidan jumper is top-down, seamless. So to make sure it didn't go to waste, I decided to self-draft another jumper, which turned out to be mentally quite a lot, but I got there in the end. I've talked about this book in depth before, so I won't go into too much detail, but there are a couple of different constructions covered in the book. So raglan is one of them, and it tells you what measurements you need for each panel, and how to decide what those measurements should be, and then how to calculate your stitch and row counts based on your gauge and based on those measurements. So that kind of stuff is very straightforward, and it definitely did teach me stuff that I wasn't aware of going into this. But it doesn't tell you everything you need to know, and I'll talk about that in a bit. I do have a project vlog for this pattern as well, just because I thought I would document the process of learning from a book how to self-draft a jumper, and also because I've never knit a jumper in this construction before, so I thought, you know, I could show you guys what I learned along the way. So I'm hoping to have that project vlog up sometime later this month. This turned out exactly the way I wanted it to look, and I'm so pleased with it. Although I wanted it to turn out this way, I didn't think that I'd be capable of getting it to turn out this way. I thought there would be some issue. Like, this is a 10 out of 10. It's perfect. Whereas I thought that I would get it to a 9 out of 10. Considering I was self-drafting it, I just thought that there would be some hiccup along the way and that it wouldn't turn out perfect. Of course, I didn't think it was going to turn out perfect. And it did. I'm so happy with it. I'm so happy with it. So in the last episode, I had finished the front and back panel, and I had just started the sleeve. For the sleeve, I had to determine a few different measurements: wrist circumference, bicep circumference, and the length of the sleeve. And I used my stitch and row gauge as explained in the book to figure out how many stitches to cast on for the wrist, how many stitches I needed at the bicep, and how frequently to increase, and how many increase rounds that I needed between the wrist and the bicep. So I finished that sleeve, I measured it, and it was actually a little bit narrow up at the bicep. I had decided on a bicep circumference of 36 centimeters, which in hindsight was actually a little bit narrow. I measured some other jumpers that I own, and they're all a minimum of 38 centimeters, but averaging around 40. So I redid the maths and I added a few centimeters to the bicep circumference to bring it up to 40 centimeters. And I reknit the sleeve according to those numbers, and it turned out perfect. I was really happy with it. I should say I was really happy with it considering the fact that I had knitted flat, and it still was impossible to tell how exactly it was going to fit because it was knit flat. So I was just kind of like laying it on top of my arm and pinching the two edges together to try and see if it would fit. So it was still kind of a very rough estimation, but ultimately at 40 centimeters, I thought it fit a lot better than the previous iteration. So I knit the second sleeve the same way. I blocked all the panels and I seamed them together. And this is kind of the main thing for me that was missing in the book. It didn't tell you anything about how to seam the panels together. And you might think it's pretty straightforward. Front and back have side seams, the sleeve gets seamed at the bottom, but there was also a part in each panel, front, back and both sleeves, where you bind off stitches at either end before starting the raglan decreases. So it was about an inch of bound off stitches at either end of each panel, and at first glance I was kind of thinking, I don't know how to seam these inch segments together, I don't know where they go, and it wasn't mentioned in the book. But when I laid out my panels and I tried to kind of put them together like a jigsaw piece, those pieces, those little inch segments, did line up in a way that made sense to me. But I do think that the book could have included a very short paragraph on how to line up your segments so that all the seams line up correctly, and also what kind of seam to use. Like, there was no mention of how to actually seam the panels together. The very first thing that I ever knit was a jumper with one square for the back, one square for the front, and two squares for the sleeves. I think it was a wool and a guying pattern or something. And for that one, I learned that I used mattress stitch. So I ended up looking up a tutorial for mattress stitch and I seamed my panels together. It was a Very Pink Knits tutorial, who is like the queen of knitting tutorials. So I'll link that down below if you need it. And of course, as soon as I seamed the panels together, I tried it on, because after 5 months of this being on the needles, that was the first time that I could actually try it on and see if the measurements were okay. And thankfully they were. The circumference and length were all perfect. I did wonder if the V-neck opening was a little bit too large, but I had also wondered the same thing with my daily pullover, and that turned out perfect once I added the collar. So I just decided to trust the process with this. And as you can see, my trust paid off. For the V-neck, I actually picked up 2 in every 3 stitches on the diagonal edges. Any V-neck that I've knit before has always had me pick up 1 stitch in every row along the diagonal edges, but I did want to make sure that that neck opening was cinched in enough. So I picked up 2 in every 3 stitches, and I don't know if there's any negative consequences to that. Like, does it affect the structural integrity of the neck opening? I don't know. Someone can tell me in the comments if it does, but so far, so good. Another thing I did, and I actually talked about this when I talked about the daily pullover, this V-neck angle is quite steep, because for the front triangles, I decreased every 3 rows instead of every 2, which is kind of what I've typically done when I've knit V-necks in the past. And so I got a quite steep angle for the V-neck opening here. And like I talked about in the daily pullover, I was worried that if I decreased every second round, again, as is typical for the V-necks that I've knit before, that I would get a bunching of fabric here. So I decided to decrease 2 in every 3 rounds. So basically I worked 2 rounds where I did a central double decrease here. And then for the 3rd round, I didn't do any decrease. And then I just repeated that kind of 3-round repeat. I wasn't sure how it would look. I didn't know if it would kind of be noticeable, but I actually think it looks fine, not noticeable at all, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. One thing I'm very proud about, and I did put a lot of effort into planning this, so I'm really happy that it actually worked out, is I wanted the raglan seams to look like 5 columns of broken rib. So I've got knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So I had to think about that strategically when knitting the front, back and sleeves. I had to think about what I wanted the very first and last column of each panel to be. So whether it was going to be a column of knit stitches or a column of rib, so knit, purl, knit, purl. That column was always going to be kind of hidden by the mattress stitch once I seamed it up. So I needed to think about the next column in, which was going to be kind of the first visible column on the outside. So for example, on the back panel, the second column in was a column of rib stitches, so knit, purl, which meant that the sleeve that connected to the back panel, that second column in needed to be a knit, so that when the two edge columns were seamed together and hidden, what you would see is a column of knit stitches on the sleeve and then a column of rib stitches on the back panel, but that it wouldn't be a visible seam. So this column here, this column of knit stitches, that's on the sleeve, whereas this column here with the rib, that's on the back panel. And it just looks seamless. Like I'm so happy with it. I can't believe it turned out exactly the way I wanted it to. I just didn't think, I don't know, as I said, I just thought that there would be some kind of hiccup that, you know, ended up with it being like a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10. I have to say that I was very much inspired by the Chantal V-neck by Moreka Knit. I actually did start knitting the Chantal crew neck sweater by Moreka Knit, which was gifted to me by a subscriber. But I realised I wasn't going to have enough yarn, so I changed gear. I also realised at that point that I kind of preferred the look of the V-neck, so I was very heavily inspired by the Chantal sweater V-neck, both for the raglan seams and the detailing around the V-neck. The Chantal series is knit with a slip stitch pattern, the kind of pattern that you do on a slip stitch heel flap if you're knitting socks. But instead of the slip stitch pattern, I obviously did broken rib, but as I said, I was just heavily inspired by the seams. And I wanted to incorporate those into this. Another thing I like is the detail up at the top of the V-neck. So where the V-neck meets the raglan seam. When I was knitting the triangles for the front panel, I decreased on the fourth column in. So that way I got this nice column of knit stitches going up. And so I have 4 columns here. I've got a rib, knit, knit. And those 4 columns kind of disappear into this column of knit stitches coming up from the raglan seam. So I really like how that looked. I thought it looked a bit weird in the front panel before I had seamed everything together, but again, you just have to kind of trust the process with these things. Now, if I were to nitpick, one thing that I would have done differently is have it so that the column of stitches next to the ribbing would have been this knit column instead of the rib column. You can't even really see the rib column, which is kind of the issue because it just looks like a messy area in between the column of knit stitches and where the ribbing starts. But it is a very small nitpicky thing that I would change if I could go back. But yeah, it's such a minor thing that I still consider this project to be a 10 out of 10. So I am so happy with this. The length, the circumference, the V-neck depth. I consider myself really lucky with the fact that this worked out so well. Knitting in panels is not for the faint-hearted. It's so difficult to tell whether it was going to fit or not, but the fit just couldn't be better. I'll put it down to a lot of blocking, measuring, reknitting, and as I said, a little bit of luck. Like even with all of the measurements that I took and all of the maths that I did to calculate stitch counts and row counts and double checking all of that maths, it still could have been the case that it sits differently once seamed, or that it just hangs differently on a body compared to just lying on the floor when I'm measuring it. So there was always going to be a chance that it didn't turn out very well, but it's complete opposite. It's perfect. I'm so happy with it. As for the yarn, it's incredibly soft. It's a merino silk and yak blend. I had a strange purchasing experience with ochre yarns. I talked about it in my Australia New Zealand yarn haul. Basically that they were just very non-communicative, and because I was ordering from Ireland, I kind of was a little bit worried about where my money had gone, basically. What happened was that I had placed the order, I think I paid through PayPal, and I got an email saying, thanks for your order, we'll confirm once your payment is processed or something like that. And I never got any other email, so as far as I was concerned, the payment hadn't been processed. Although when I checked my bank account, the money was gone from my bank account, so I was a little bit worried. I checked their Instagram, they hadn't posted for a good few weeks at that point. I think I sent them a message on Instagram, no reply. I sent them more than one email, no reply. And I also checked their website and it said that they were on holidays for the month of May, I think it was. But at that point it was already the start of June, so I thought they would have been back by then. And also I had to go looking for that information on their website. Like I think it was in their about page, which like most people wouldn't go to. Like I think if you're going to be on holidays to the point where orders will be affected, it should be on the homepage or else on the listing for the yarn. Anyway, I was in contact with my friend. She was receiving a bunch of packages for me, which I had ordered, and she's not a knitter, so I didn't expect her to be able to tell which was which. But eventually I asked her to send me a photo of all the packages, and I could see that there was one from Ochre Yarns. So it had arrived. According to the emails, my payment was still processing, but according to my bank account, the money was gone, and I did get the yarn. So it obviously all worked out in the end. The only reason I didn't completely panic was because it was actually recommended to me by Sarah from Two Pearls in a Pod, and I trusted her judgment. So I was like, it must be a legit business. I'm just going to trust the process here, and it worked out. All that being said, would I purchase from them again? The fact that they're non-communicative doesn't scare me now, because I know that they're a legit business, and if I order from them, I will get my yarn. But it's more about the principle of like not communicating with your customers when they're spending a lot of money on your yarn. I don't know if I would purchase from them again. I don't feel a need to purchase from them again. I'll put it that way. As opposed to the Summer Fiesta yarn from Great Ocean Road. Like, I need to use that yarn again. Whereas I feel like I've experienced this. It's very nice, but I'm happy to try other yarns now. The yarn itself is very soft. I love the colour variation in it. I think it's advertised as like a solid colour. It's obviously not. It's quite heavily variegated, but I think that's really, really beautiful. I love how it looks. Can't wait to wear this. Sarah, I remember, described it to me as mind-meltingly soft, and I would have to agree with her on that. So yes, there will be a project vlog on this soon. I'm not going to be releasing a pattern for this. I think this would be far too complicated to grade, especially to try and get all of these seams to line up the way they look in this size for other sizes. But I do have the stitch and row counts for my size on my Ravelry project page. And just for reference, I have a 90 centimetre bust, and this has about 15 centimetres of positive ease. So that is another success story. Finally, moving on to whip. My first whip is inconsequential, so I'm not going to spend too long talking about it. It's just a pair of vanilla socks. These are toe up with a German short row heel, and I'm using Olivia and Oliver fibres, and it's the spring colourway from her 2024 advent calendar. The green yarn is Ponoskova Smoharum, I think that's how you pronounce it, in the colour 19, and I actually got this in Slovakia. One interesting thing is that I did do some increases before starting the German short row heel. These are going to be a gift, but I have quite a high instep, and I find that a German short row heel as it is just doesn't really fit me very well. So I wanted to do these increases so that I could at least try these on and see if they fit, and if they do, that'll be the way I do my toe up socks from now on. Although cuff down is actually my preference, and they will still fit the recipient even with this little gusset that I made, because we have the same foot size and similar instep size and all that kind of stuff. So if they fit me, they'll fit her, and I'll know for future then that I could knit my toe up socks this way and they'll fit me as well. I've already used this yarn to make another pair of socks. I just cast these on to have something to carry around with me. I'm knitting these on 2mm needles, and it's a 64 stitch circumference. My next whip is Cami number 7 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. The yarn that I'm using is Sandnes Yarn Tin Lena in the colour olive green, and I'm knitting the size 2 on a 3mm needle. I cast this on because I was going to Malaga for a short holiday, and at the time all of my whips were basically all of the finished objects that I've shown so far, and they were either too awkward or too woolly to bring to southern Spain, so I decided to cast this on. I cast it on the day of my flight with my Knit Pro Symphony needles, which are the wooden ones, and I snapped my needle in the airport. So as soon as we landed, I of course went looking for somewhere that I could buy new needles. Thankfully there was a haberdashery near where we were staying, and they did have these awful needles that I absolutely despise, but they do the job. So I'm stuck with these needles, but I'm persevering. I have knit this before. I actually got this yarn to knit Cami number 4 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, but after I knit my other Cami number 7, I just liked it so much that I figured I would knit it again. And I also think with the thicker straps, it's more wearable for me. Like the spaghetti straps of the Cami number 4 is not something that I would have an opportunity to wear that often. So this is a broken rib top down V-neck camisole, and you start by knitting the back panel. So you do a triangle for each back, left and right, and then you pick up along a cast on edge to knit 2 triangles for the front. Then you join everything in the round and you work the whole body then in the round. So I worked the back and then I broke the yarn as instructed, but then I decided that I actually wanted to knit it flat, which meant that I could have just kept going back and forth. I didn't need to break the yarn, but at that point the yarn was already broken, so I decided to cast on the front, and I would just continue working on the front, and then I'll go back to the back panel once this is done. I'm knitting it flat for 2 reasons. Number 1, broken rib is very stretchy. My other Cami number 7 feels like it has absolutely no structure around the sides. Like I feel like I could stretch it out to twice my body width if I wanted to. And so I wanted to knit it flat so that I would have seams at the side. They won't add much in terms of structure, but I just wanted to feel like there was something there. And then also means that I'll have seams on the shoulders where I'll seam the front and back panels together instead of picking up from the cast on edge. Second reason was that I was worried about the tension changing from working flat to working in the round. I've never had an issue with tension changing between working flat and in the round before, but the yarn is very forgiving, as you might be able to tell already, so I just didn't want to risk it. This is just my makeshift stitch marker because I didn't have any with me, so I just threaded some yarn through to mark that stitch so I could count my rows. As well as working flat instead of in the round, I've also removed some rows from the straps. A lot of people on Ravelry have done this as well, just because the armhole, I think, or else the V-neck. I think people remove the rows because the V-neck can be quite deep. The 2 triangles on the back have a little section where you just knit back and forth for 13 rows, I think it is, before you start increasing. And on my previous version of this, I removed 10 of those 13 rows. And I am quite happy with the fit, but there are times when I think the V-neck is just slightly too deep. So on this one, I removed 12 rows instead of 10. It's not much more, but I can't remove any more than that without having to rework the shaping, because there is only 13 rows before you start the shaping. And if you remove any more than that and you just carry on the increases as normal, you're not going to have as many stitches in the full circumference as you need to. So I removed 12 rows from that knitting straight section, and I basically just started the increases immediately. And I also removed 10 rows on the front. The front straps have a longer section of knitting straight before you start the increases, so that's not a concern there. It's just kind of the back is your like limiting factor of how many rows you can remove from the straps. So yeah, I think I've got about 10 centimeters left to do in the front. Again, broken rib, it's kind of hard to get your gauge. It's quite stretchy, and I do wonder how much stretch there's going to be just with general wear. So I'm trying to take all that into account before I determine the final length that I want. I might even get to a point where I work maybe 10 more centimeters, but I won't bind off. I'll just go to the back panel, get that to the same length, seam them at the sides, try it on, and check the length then. And then I can add more length if I need to. It is tough on my hands because it's a fingering weight yarn, and I'm tensioning quite tightly to get the right gauge. I am a very loose knitter. I nearly always have to go down a needle size, but when it comes to a pattern like this, where I don't want to work on a smaller needle size than I already am, I just try and tension my yarn a bit tighter, but that means that it's quite tough on my hands, and so I'm only able to work on this for short periods at a time, but it is growing faster than I expected to. I'm kind of telling myself to work a certain number of rows per day, so at least then I know that it does have a finish line in sight. It's not something that I'm kind of working on whenever I feel like it, because then I would never work on it. Just because I have other projects that I prefer working on at the moment. And the first priority of those other projects is the second sample of my Aidan jumper, which I'm so excited about. So the reason I'm knitting a second sample is because the gauge of the first one that I did is a little bit tighter than what I wanted to release for the pattern. As I said, I wanted the pattern to be appealing to intermediate beginners, and I felt like a larger gauge would be a little bit more appealing than the 26 or 27 stitches, which is what my other one was. So for this one, the honeycomb gauge is 25 stitches, whereas the other cables are 23 stitches in 10 centimeters. So it's a slightly larger gauge, and therefore I think it will be a little bit more appealing to intermediate beginners, or anyone really. I think most people would prefer knitting an all-over Aran cable jumper on a slightly larger gauge. This yarn is from Ballyhora Fibres, and it's her BFL Romney DK base. So it's a blend of BFL and Romney, as the name suggests, and this is in the colour Woolen. This is one of the colourways that was available to the testers with a 15% discount. To me, this is just a classic Aran jumper colour, and for the sake of a tutorial, I think it's easier to see with a lighter coloured yarn. But yeah, I absolutely love this colourway. I'm so excited to have this. So I don't have much to say about this pattern that I haven't already said. This yarn is what I would consider to be a true DK weight, whereas the Explorer Knits and Fibres Rocky's DK is slightly finer, and I'm knitting it on 4mm needles as opposed to 3.5, but the overall fit and ease should be the same as my first sample. So I am working the back yoke at the moment. It's shaped using German short rows. I really don't want this to be lingering on my needles. I kind of want to just put as much focus into this as possible and get it done so I can move on from Aran cables for a little while. Sierra recently, well maybe not recently, I think a couple of years ago, switched her yarn lines to be from Irish and British breeds of sheep. So yeah, it does feel a little bit more authentic. The only change that I have made to this version compared to the first version is that, I'll show the first one as well. So on the first sample, and indeed on the original jumper that I was recreating, there are 2 columns of this 2x2 cable bordered by twisted stitches. So you've got twisted stitches, 2x2 cable, twisted stitches, 2x2 cable, twisted stitches. But on this sample, I couldn't actually fit 2 of those columns in with the number of stitches that are on the needle. So for the sizes extra small up to large, there's just one of these columns here. And from the extra large up, there is enough stitches on the needle to incorporate 2 of those 2x2 cables with the twisted stitches. We have finally made it to my last project, and that is something I cast on very recently. This is the Cloud Top by Petite Knit, and the yarn is La Droguerie Kaleido in the colour Blue Sapphire. La Droguerie is a yarn shop in France, and I think I read recently that they closed down, or that they closed down one of their shops. So they have at least 2, maybe 3 shops. I've been to the Paris one and the Marseille one, and I love both of them. They're incredible. So I do hope that at least one of them is still open, because it was such a cool shop. They do all their yarn by weight, so they've got all of their yarn on a wall, and you just tell someone how much you want and they take it off and they weigh it off for you. So it's really good for reducing waste as well. You can just kind of get exactly what you need and not a gram more. This particular yarn is 98% bamboo and 2% linen, and it is incredibly drapey, incredibly soft and smooth and shiny, everything that you would expect from a bamboo yarn. And I'm knitting this on a 3.25mm needle in the size 3, which I think is a small. I cast this on because I was going to a 4-day music festival, and I wanted to have something to bring that I could knit when I was just like sitting outside with my friends in our camping chairs in the good weather, just chatting, and I could just have something quite easy and mindless to work on. So I actually only cast this on like 6 days ago, and I've already joined in the round and worked maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches under the arm. So it's moving quite fast, and I'm very happy about that. It does feel like a nice break from all of the other complex projects that I've had going on for the last couple of months. I have used this exact yarn before. If you are a long time viewer, you might recognise it from last summer. I attempted to knit the rolled edge tank by Jessie May, but I tried to modify the back shaping and I just made a mess of it. I ended up realising that what I wanted was the shaping of the Cloud Top by Petite Knit, but with the hem of the rolled edge top by Jessie May, because it has kind of a curved hem. Is that what they call? Yeah, I think it's what it's called. But I ended up trying to figure out my own shaping for the back yoke, and yeah, as I said, it turned out to be a flop. Didn't like the fit of it at all. It looked kind of like a bib that your school gives you on sports day, is the way I thought of it, and I just didn't like it. I always knew that I was going to frog it, and I kind of accepted that I would just work the Cloud Top pattern, and I've kind of gone off the hem idea anyway from the rolled edge tank, so I might just follow the Cloud Top pattern from start to finish. Despite how much I disliked what I made last summer with this yarn, I loved the finished fabric, and so I really didn't want to see it go to waste. So I'm really happy that I finally have it back on the needles, and will hopefully end up with something wearable. The construction is pretty typical for a petite knit pattern. You cast on for the back yoke, you break the yarn, you slip some stitches so that you're only working on those center stitches along the back neck, and then you work German short rows to shape the shoulders. Once that shaping is done, I'll show the back. Once that shaping is done, you just work back and forth to work the back yoke. At some point you start working increases to shape the underarms, and then you break the yarn. You pick up from the shoulders and you work these purl rows, which I really like. And you also do some German short row shaping in the shoulders, which you can actually kind of see there. It's pretty effective. I quite like the shaping there. Then you cast on to join the right and left shoulders, and then you work back and forth until the front is long enough to work the underarm shaping. And then you join under the arms, and the rest is smooth sailing. So as I said, I am in the round now, but I'm going to put it on pause because I'm going to see the Odyssey in a week or so, I think, and it's 3 hours long. And I thought this would be perfect to bring to work on for those 3 hours. By the way, I wouldn't knit in the cinema if there was a complete stranger sitting beside me. I'd usually go with my boyfriend or my family, and they don't mind me knitting. But yeah, I wouldn't do it next to a complete stranger in case it was distracting to them and they didn't like it. So yes, that is my Cloud Top, and that is my last whip, which means we've come to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching today. I really enjoyed getting back in front of the camera to talk about my knitting, to talk about my projects, and I'm really grateful to have this space to be able to share with all of you guys. So thank you so much for watching. If you did like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel already and you want to see more content like this, you can hit the subscribe button. And of course, if you have any questions about anything that I talked about today, or if anything you'd like to share, please do comment down below. I always reply to all of my comments, so yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys. And I just realised that I completely forgot to talk about what I'm wearing. I am wearing my Poppy Tee by Petite Knit. I quite heavily modified this. I got rid of the ribbing on the cuffs and the hem and on the collar. And I basically copied the finishings from the Tea No. 1 by My Favourite Things Knitwear, which I've also knit. And I knit this in Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino held double, the colour powder, and navy for the stripes. I don't wear this as much as I would like to. I really love the fit around the shoulders, the shaping around the shoulders. This was a project that kind of made me really think about the length of my garments. At the time, a lot of my garments were ending up too short, but whenever I was knitting them, I always was worried that they were going to be too long, and I always thought they were long enough, and then I would bind off and turns out they were too short. But I think after this garment, I realised that I needed to kind of, once I reached the point where I thought a garment was long enough, I actually needed to add another 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and then it was actually long enough. And I always tried on my garments. I would put them onto a barber cord and I would try them on, but I always thought they looked long enough. But then somehow when I bound them off and I wore them, I think just with general wear and the way garments kind of fall and settle into themselves with wear, they just weren't long enough. And so after this garment, I kind of told myself, when you're knitting a garment and when you think it's long enough, you need to add 2 more inches. Even if you try it on and it looks long enough, add another, maybe not 2 inches, but at least 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches, but just add more length because it's not going to be long enough if you bind off now. So yeah, this is a garment that really taught me how to get a better estimate of how long I need something to be. The other thing is that I don't like how much it kind of poofs out in all directions. It's almost like an A-line finish, and I think I should have added bust darts to this. So yeah, I think that would help because like I feel like there's a lot of air here and at the back that I just don't love. So if I were to go back and fix this, I would add bust darts and I'd make it longer. Okay, this is the actual end of the video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.